looking forward to delivering the session, and hopefully we'll keep it mostly within time. So just as a quick introduction, as Glenn mentioned, my name is Tama. I'm an environmental consultant and trainer based in Newcastle upon Tyne. I set my own business up, Imvelo Limited, in 2015 as an environmental consultancy and training provider. You can't see me, but you'll be able to hear from my voice that I have a slightly strange accent, and that's because I'm originally from South Africa. And as a bit of a tribute to that, Imvelo, as I've named my company, is a bit of a tip of the hat to my African roots, being the Zulu word for environment. Imvelo was set up to provide expert environmental consultancy and training to UK businesses to help them meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We do that through a number of services. Primarily, we specialize in the implementation of environmental management systems, which can be accredited to international standards like ISO 14001, ISO 50001. We also use ISO standards to calculate carbon footprints and integrate those environmental management systems with existing health, safety, and quality management systems. Another area that I specialize in is UK and European environmental legislation. So most of the time I help businesses understand all of the environmental laws that apply to their activities and help them implement controls and processes to manage compliance, not end up in trouble with any of the regulators, and ultimately not cause pollution or damage to the environment. This is also supported by auditing, so continuously monitoring to make sure that we're on the right track towards sustainable, responsible environmental management. And all of this is underpinned by accredited environmental training. You'll see by the nature of the presentations I've pulled together this morning, education in sustainability is absolutely paramount before we can begin to address it. It's quite a complicated bag, so you have to understand the issue completely before you can begin to identify the solutions. So I'm going to bring kind of a lot of elements into this presentation, but ultimately what we're leading towards is understanding how the Sustainable Development Goals can provide a roadmap towards sustainability, and considering people, planet, and profit in future business and in future society. So in considering how to move forward sustainably and ethically, my big question really is, can we tackle both climate change and the COVID-19 recovery? And without any hesitation, my absolute answer is yes. Yes, the choices that we make now will shape the global economy for decades to come. And the most consequential question looming over us right now is not whether we can address the COVID crisis and climate change at the same time, but rather whether we can afford not to. We've learned so many lessons from this pandemic, but the top one is that high probability, high impact risks must be acted upon in a timely fashion, and delay is costly. Healthcare professionals have warned us about COVID-19's devastating effects from an early stage, and what we've seen is that those that reacted quickly based on the scientific information are the ones who are coming out of the curve a little bit more quickly. So the structure of this talk, bear in mind we've only got an hour, which is a bit of a challenge. Absolutely love talking about sustainability, and it is quite a complicated bag of subject matter. There is a lot to cover, so everything that I talk about here is very high level, top level, but what I'm trying to do is just provide you with a little bit of food for thought to take away and delve into a bit more deeply on your own. So to begin with, we are going to address the history of climate change, again, because education and knowledge is paramount in terms of sustainable development. We're going to touch on some of the sustainability issues that are most pertinent to a COVID-19 recovery. What I've done throughout the presentation is draw similarities to lessons learned from the COVID-19 crisis to those that we are aware of in terms of climate change. And then at the end of the presentation, work through some of the solutions for sustainability and how the Sustainable Development Goals can be used to create sustainable and ethical businesses going forward. So to begin with, COVID-19 versus climate change. We are in the middle of a crisis, And that crisis is a bubble, okay? So I even found myself saying to someone the other day, I kind of miss a time where Brexit dominated the newspaper headlines. Everything else seems to have fallen by the wayside because we have a crisis that needs to be dealt with right now, and that is absolutely the right approach. But we can't forget some of the other crises that need addressing. And this takes us back to just last year, June last year, where the UK committed through legislation to bring the UK greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050 compared with 1990 levels. So that means we need to see an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions within the next 20 to 30 years. This is written into law, and this is underpinning the UK's industrial strategy going forward. So what the government wants and what is being written into law is that the UK is going to be at the forefront of providing low carbon technologies. And there is an estimation that there are already about 400,000 jobs in the low carbon businesses and their supply chains. And the sector has the potential to support up to 2 million jobs by 2030. So in aligning with this environmental sustainability agenda, we are also seeing that there are opportunities for economic growth and recovery. And this is a statement from last year. There are multiple newspaper articles and scientific reports that support this. But it's in the news today as well. So this is a newspaper snippet from the 8th of May. And it is very clear that the UK must prioritise a green economic recovery. So this was a letter that was written to Boris Johnson from 60 of the largest organisations in the UK. And some of the key things that are coming out in it is that there is a priority to invest in infrastructure, technology and skills to create jobs that help sustainability, and also a call to exclude companies in polluting industries that do not have a proper climate plan. So with all of the financial and economic support that is being provided to businesses, it seems that sustainability is going to be a requirement as to whether you are eligible for any funding or governmental support. The other thing is that there is a lot of movement in the background, even with the COVID crisis going on, with new environmental laws being written into draft and ultimately debated in the House of Commons to address environmental issues and restore ecosystems. And all of that requires global leaders to come together to plan for a sustainable economic recovery. So in terms of the history of climate change, I don't want to delve into this too much because it's very detailed and very complex and there's a lot of things going on. But I wanted to show you this graph, which was taken from the Mauna Loa Observatory, which is in Hawaii. This is an observatory that has been tracking air pollution and greenhouse gas quantities in our air since 1950, okay? So in terms of understanding how quickly we need to react to scientific information, the truth is that the science has been telling us that climate change is coming for nearly 70 years. In fact, since the earlier 20th century, we began to see correlations between human behavior and impacts on the environment. And this has expanded over the years to consider a global perspective. Now, the most interesting thing here is this graph. This is greenhouse gas concentrations in our atmosphere. And what we can see is that it is steadily increasing to come to a point. And this just reminds me of all of the graphs that we're seeing in the news on a daily basis in terms of the growth and infection rate of COVID-19, that there is a steep incline until we get to a peak. And that peak is the most critical point. That is where the worst impacts of either COVID-19 or in this case, climate change and greenhouse gas concentrations are going to start to impact people, planet, and profit. One thing that we are familiar with is that there is science that underpins this kind of progress in terms of COVID-19. And there are similar kind of data that support the progress of climate change and the impact that humans have had on the environment. The first is that 1.2 degrees is how much the Earth has warmed on average since the 19th century. Now, debate around climate change shows that there are peaks and troughs in global temperatures, but what there is that this has been an exponential growth directly related to human activity. Now, for that 1.2 degrees, 2 degrees is actually the target that has been agreed globally by the United Nations to avoid the worst impacts of climate change via the Paris Agreement. Governments settled on the 2-degree threshold partly through political expediency, but also because scientists have warned of severe consequences from extreme weather events should we exceed this 2-degree threshold. And then there's also this number, 450 parts per million. So this is the concentration of CO2, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which is required to stabilize the global temperature rise below 2 degrees centigrade. And this is what it looks like at the moment. So this is data that was taken from that Mao laboratory in Hawaii. This is data from February 2019 versus February 2020 to demonstrate that we are eking ever closer to that 450 parts per million. Quite interesting because this is, this data is from just before lockdowns started to occur across the world. And what we have seen is that there has been a dramatic reduction in CO2 emissions in the atmosphere simply because everybody is staying at home and businesses and vehicles and transport aren't operating the way that they used to. Now, the reason that these numbers are significant is that they're they're very similar to the R rate, which we're much more familiar with in terms of COVID-19. The reproductive number, the R rate, is how we determine the point at which the disease will spread exponentially, where we're unable to control the rate of infection. Essentially, it's a line in the sand, okay? So this is the number that we absolutely cannot cross if we want to be able to control how this moves forward. So in terms of climate change, although it measures different things, the 2 degree centigrade threshold, or the 450 parts per million of CO2 concentrations, is the peak. It's the line in the sand that we absolutely cannot cross if we want to control the impacts on the environment. Why does this all matter? Well, climate change presents multifaceted risks, including increased storms and extreme weather events, shifting weather patterns, sea level rises. There is a strong correlation to the spread of range of infectious diseases, and also it's putting huge pressure on human societies. We are very aware of how our attitudes to materials and resources are having negative impacts on the environment. David Attenborough only kind of 18 months ago brought to the public awareness the impact that our irresponsible management of plastics was having on the oceans and on the environment. And what we can see now is that is filtering through nature and actually coming back to us to affect our own health and safety in terms of the resources that we depend upon. And all of this matters because we have one planet that is making human life possible and worth living. So this is what we call ecosystem services. These are the benefits provided to us by ecosystems, those natural cycles that give us everything we need to survive, but not only to survive, to enjoy life on this planet. So everything from regulating the carbon cycle, the water cycle, pollination, resources that we depend upon like food, fish, wood, soil for agriculture and farming. Nature does all of this for us. We just tap into it to use it. Now, the truth is that there are only four things that humans categorically need to survive. And that is clean air, clean food, clean water, and safe shelter. And ecosystem services give us these. Now, I believe through one of the earlier sessions, this has already been addressed through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what you see here is that you cannot facilitate a return to work, you cannot build society, you cannot build the economy unless those basic physiological needs are provided for, because this affects what people prioritize, what becomes important to them. So these biological requirements for human survival are the needs that need to be satisfied first before anything else can be built or developed. And we have seen that climate change has a huge impact on human health. So through the various elements of climate change, we see air pollution, severe weather, again, changes in vector ecology, diseases, the crossover between diseases from the natural environment into a human environment, impacts on water, impacts on soil, and extreme weather events, and how that impact on human health has been scientifically validated for many, many years. In fact, there is an estimate that climate change is already responsible for 300,000 deaths a year and is affecting more than 300 million people, according to research conducted by a Kofi Annan think tank. In terms of human health, the one that sticks out to me the most, though, is global air pollution, okay? So the World Health Organization estimates that 1 in 8 of all global deaths occurs as a direct result of air pollution. And that equates to approximately 7 million deaths per year, okay? Now, this is terrible. As awful as COVID-19 is, as all of the worst case predictions are in terms of how many people are going to be affected and die as a result of this disease, what we see is that air pollution is responsible for a lot more, but there are strong correlations. We know that climate change has a direct correlation to respiratory health in human beings. And this is because of air pollution and the concentration of nasty chemicals and substances that are in the air that we breathe. We see that they are correlated to asthma, COPD, chest infections, various other chest diseases. And we also know that any of these underlying conditions makes people much more susceptible to the worst impacts of COVID-19. And also this article from the 24th of April of this year, which outlines that research is being done in terms of whether there is a correlation to how airborne diseases spread dependent on the volume of pollution in the atmosphere. So this research is still underway. As with all science, it takes a little bit of time to gather data and to see how patterns are emerging. But previous studies have shown that air pollution particles do harbor microbes, and that pollution is likely to have carried the viruses causing bird flu, measles, and foot and mouth disease over considerable distances. So again, there's a strong driver to address climate change to ultimately have a positive impact on human health. And finally, to consider that we are using all of the resources now. We know we are at a critical point in terms of sustaining 7 billion people on this planet. There are going to be 9 billion people on this planet by 2050, and the estimate is 11 billion people on this planet by 2100, okay? So if we are at a resource crunch right now, what about future generations? What about our children and our grandchildren? What type of world are we leaving behind for them? And relating this to businesses, this was a report that was written in 2012 by the Carbon Trust. They titled it, "Businesses are Sleepwalking into a Resource Crunch." In 2012, this was their prediction about the point at which any of these resource issues became critical to business operations. And I think you can see that this timeline is actually fairly accurate in terms of what we've experienced over the last 5 years since 2015. Carbon, greenhouse gases have been very much at the forefront of priorities that need addressing. We know the crisis with oil and gas. There is a huge issue with water in that, in spite of the fact that this planet is 70% water, only about 3% of that is drinkable. Grid energy and waste are huge issues. We're dealing with them now. 2020 is the year, and all we have to do is throw back to that plastics problem to recognize the consequences that we're having. And imminently, other natural resources such as timber and rare earth metals are also going to come up against the crunch. Now, this graph always sticks with me. I remember going through my education and being told that climate change was coming. It was something that was going to happen in the future. But what we're seeing now is that the future is now. Climate change is happening right now, right in front of our eyes, which means we can't pretend that we have time to come up with innovative solutions. And in terms of business, what this all ties into is that resiliency framework, okay? That business continuity, technical infrastructure, the crisis issues, you know, that you might face as a result of extreme weather events. How are you going to continue to operate as an organization when the resources that you are most dependent on become either unavailable or much more expensive or reduced quality because there's increased competition around getting them? So considering climate change as a global issue should help you determine what you do locally to ensure the sustainability of your own organization. And this brings us back to what are the similarities between COVID-19 and climate change? Well, the thing that, again, really sticks in my head, and you do have to appreciate I have a slight environmental bias here, but the old adage that prevention is better than cure is widely embraced in the health context and is dominating.
Tamar, just to stop you there, sorry to be so rude. Can I just give everyone a reminder? Please, can everyone mute their microphones, please? If you can just bear with me for 1 second, Tamar.
No problem. Good to know everyone's still there, though.
Yeah, just double checking. Great, that's it. Sorry, Tamar, please go ahead.
No, not a problem. Yeah, so there's this adage that prevention is better than cure. We're seeing it a lot in the COVID response, okay? The more we take to prevent us hitting that peak, exceeding that R value, will make a, you know, fundamental difference to how we come out of this crisis. What I can't wrap my head around is that climate science has been around for over 70 years, okay? We have known that this was coming. We knew we were working towards the peak. It's just taken us 70 years to get to that peak, which unfortunately allowed us time to defer our action. You know, we thought we had time to come up with solutions, but because of the way that the economy is built, we haven't kind of progressed as much as we potentially could have in that time. Morgan Stanley estimates the global losses from natural disasters alone, which is only one element of the impact of climate change, has amounted to over $3 trillion in the last decade. And although the science around the financial impact of climate change is really hard to come by, primarily because it's not always so easy to put an economic value to an environmental issue, but there is an estimation that if we only hit that 2-degree threshold, GDP will be impacted by 15%. If we go up to 3 degrees, we're going to see a 25% impact. And if absolutely nothing is done, temperatures will exceed 4 degrees, potentially 6 degrees by 2100, and we would see a decline in GDP of 30% from 2010 levels, okay? If we do absolutely nothing, by 2030, it could end up costing $600 trillion just to try and fix what we could have prevented from happening in the first place, okay? Now, I'm very aware that this all seems really bleak. I try really hard not to make it all doom and gloom, but one of the biggest things in addressing sustainability is you have to understand the issue and you have to understand the intricacies of how people, planet, and profit are related to each other, so that any decisions that you make are not knee-jerk decisions, but you really understand the consequences of each action and how that's going to affect different stakeholders. With nature, you know, this planet being a stakeholder all in its own right. So here we are again. Can we really tackle both climate change and a COVID-19 recovery? Because both of these seem to be monumental mountains that need to be fixed and need to be addressed. And again, I remain optimistic that actually we have an opportunity now. Everything we've known about business as normal has fallen dead in the water, you know, stone in the water. Absolutely everything's changed right now, which means we have a perfect opportunity to come back and do things differently from an almost or relatively blank slate. So I'm not paying attention to the comment buttons here, but just for a bit of information, if you could type yes or no, my first question to you is, have you heard of the triple bottom line of sustainability? Is this a concept you've come across before? Have you ever heard of it before now? So if you just jot down yes or no, I'll review the answers at the end. It'll be quite interesting. What I find normally is that no, this is not a concept that is very well shared or highlighted, but it's a well-established academic answer of what sustainability is. And it's what we call the triple bottom line. Sometimes it's called the three-legged stool of sustainability. And the concept is that people, planet, profit all represent legs of a stool. And if all of those are given equal consideration in terms of driving sustainability, then you have a perfectly functional three-legged stool. If either of those, people, planet, profit, are given too much attention or not enough attention, then you end up with uneven legs and the stool is going to topple over, and therefore sustainability cannot be achieved. So in order to move forward with sustainability, although I, again, have a planet bias, it is impossible to address sustainability without also addressing society and economy and trying to find a way for all three of these to work together. And this leads us on to the concept of sustainable development. So understanding that we're up against a resource crunch right now, how do we continue to build, continue to innovate, continue to grow to meet the needs of a growing population without absolutely obliterating all of nature's resources? And sustainable development is the concept. It was coined in 1987 as a term in something called the Brundtland Report. And this is the route towards a sustainable future whilst continuing to grow and development. Most importantly, it is about meeting people's needs now and in the future whilst getting back into environmental limits, which means significant improvements in environmental and social performance whilst also staying economically viable. I'm just going to take a quick aside here. So we're very common, very familiar with the three-legged stool. There is another model here in the top right of your screen, which I like to call the fried egg model. It's a bit, you can conceptualize it a bit like a pyramid. So at the base of the pyramid, you have the environment, and out of the environment, society is built, and out of society, the economy is built. My argument, my feeling, is that without a strong and stable environment, society and economy never really have a chance of developing because the resources aren't there to help that development. The academic debate around what sustainability and sustainable development means, how you move forward in it, that's potentially a 3-day workshop. So unfortunately, we don't have time for this, but if anybody has any questions, please do come back to me on this area. And just to tie that all together, that there is a known social and economic impact of climate change. As with COVID-19, while we consider that a health issue, what we've seen is that health issue has a huge impact on society and economy right now. In terms of the three-legged stool, society and economy are shorter legs. They are being severely impacted, whilst conversely, the environment is being quite positively impacted. Nature is booming, nature is returning, the air is cleaner than it has been. We've got more species being spotted in gardens. And as wonderful as that is, it's not sustainable because society and the economy are suffering. So we need to figure out how to align the three legs of the stool. So this leads us on to solutions. Okay, we understand that there are a number of issues that need to be addressed in terms of sustainability and climate change and how we move forward. So how can we do that? So again, this is just another really quick poll, yes or no answer if you can. Have you ever heard of the Sustainable Development Goals? Now, I'm not watching the comments because that's a little bit distracting and I'm not going to make any assumptions. But normally when I ask this question, the answer is fairly unanimously no. No, we have not heard of them, which is a travesty. The Sustainable Development Goals were established in September 2015. 193 world leaders signed up to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So these are global goals. Every country has made a commitment to support this roadmap to sustainability. And what they do is they outline what the priorities are that need to be addressed to bring about sustainable development by 2030. So the reason I love the global goals is that we are on a 10-year timeline, which is much more pertinent if we look at that history of how climate change has progressed over the last 70 years. The UK has a commitment to become net zero by 2050. A lot of the data is looking at solutions by 2100. My personal opinion is that is too far in the future for us to even begin to wrap our head around. We need something that is just a stone's throw away. So 2030 is a much more manageable deadline to bring about rapid and realistic change. And the Sustainable Development Goals are brilliant in terms of they hit on every single pillar of sustainability. So we have people, planet, and profit all being considered in this roadmap towards sustainability. Business Commission for Sustainable Development says that meeting the 17 goals, which are underpinned by 169 targets, could create almost 380 million jobs and opportunities worth $12 trillion in sectors ranging from housing, energy, to circular economy, and advances in healthcare, which again is highly pertinent at this moment in time. But for these opportunities to be harnessed and for these targets to be met, businesses need to get involved. And this is how Imvelo and the work that I do was kind of born, is I am helping businesses to align their activities to the Sustainable Development Goals to bring about real change. In terms of why it's important to engage with the Sustainable Development Goals, this was a report that was conducted by PwC in terms of how businesses are engaging with the Sustainable Development Goals. What they found was 71% of businesses say they are planning to engage with the SDGs, but only 13% of them have actually taken steps towards how they can assess their impact. I think the thing that stands out most for me here is that 90% of citizens say it's important for businesses to sign up to the SDGs. And of that 90%, 85% said that they would boycott a company or a brand that they did not feel was sustainable or ethical in its operations. So again, aside from global issues like climate change, local issues like your stakeholder needs and expectations, what people want from you and from brands that they buy from, there is a really strong driver to become sustainable and ethical and to share the good work that you are doing. Ban Ki-moon, who's the United Nations Secretary General, supported this. He says that business is a vital partner in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and companies can contribute through their core activities by assessing their impact, setting ambitious goals, and communicating transparently about their results. The SDGs really do present an opportunity for business-led solutions and technologies to be developed to address the world's biggest sustainable development challenges. And again, what we see here is, the incredible nature of innovation in businesses. 3 months ago, breweries were making beer and now they're making hand sanitizer. Businesses in manufacturing who make plastic components are now making visors and various elements for healthcare professionals. If we understand what is the most critical need, we can provide products and services and create sustainable businesses that address those needs specifically. And just bringing it back to kind of the economic driver to address sustainability. So despite the initial reticence of the business community, measures aimed at dealing with global climate change are an opportunity for driving economic growth. The World Commission on the Economy and Climate, in a report at the end of 2018, said adopting ambitious climate measures may generate profits of $26 billion by 2030 and create 65 million new jobs within low carbon economies, industries, okay? So there is a lot of potential, potentially 18 more million jobs. keeping below the 2-degree threshold, 6 million jobs from addressing circular economy needs, and 1.2 billion jobs globally depend on a stable and healthy environment like agriculture, fishery, forestry. And again, we can see the impact that a crisis, like a healthcare crisis, can have worse effects on certain industries than others. And the same is true for climate change. So why should businesses align with the Sustainable Development Goals? Well, firstly, and I feel very strongly about this, the SDGs provide a framework to help identify future business opportunities and mitigate against risk. We know what is coming. The science is there telling us what the worst impacts of climate change are going to be. So we can take steps now to future-proof our businesses, to make our businesses more resilient. Also, there is a strong driver to enhance the value of corporate sustainability. It is now not good enough to be a massively polluting organization and think that planting 10 trees a year is going to compensate from the impact of that. Because your stakeholders, your customers, your consumers are much more educated, are much more aware of the issues, and have much higher expectations of businesses. What I also think is really relevant right now is that through addressing the Sustainable Development Goals, we have an opportunity to stabilize societies and markets. And off the back of the COVID crisis, that seems to be one of the most pertinent issues that we need to address. How do we bring society and business back and begin our economic recovery as a consequence of this, significant event? And what I personally love about the SDGs is that they are a platform that provides a common language and a shared purpose. The United Nations have done all of the work here. The logos, the goals, the 167 sub-goals, all of the KPIs that can support any specific SDG, they are all there, so we can all be singing from the same song sheet. And this is just a hint back to Barry's presentation in terms of project management, is that this is not a small undertaking. There is a lot of work that would have to be done in terms of aligning your business with the Sustainable Development Goals, but all of that falls into common principles in terms of project management and how we can move those forward. And Barry talked a lot about the tools and mechanisms available to drive project management off the back of the COVID-19 crisis. So I found this really great image here, and I'm going to introduce just a couple of the SDGs in turn to give you guys a bit of food for thought. I really do wish I could delve into all of these in a lot more detail, and there will, like I say, be opportunities for questions, but all of this is just kind of high-level stuff. So this is kind of a summary of some of the key industries that are having to reconsider their business models right now as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. But this just gives the top 5, sustainable development goals that industries can actually positively affect and where they can do the most work. So what I've done is kind of taken a handful of each of these SDGs, and we're just going to delve into them in a little bit more detail. And hopefully this will give you guys some ideas to move forward sustainably and ethically and bring the SDGs into your post-COVID-19 recovery. Okay, so let's just start with Sustainable Development Goal 3. Okay, this is the one to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. Health is a fundamental human right and a key indicator of sustainable development. Poor health threatens the rights of children to education, it limits economic opportunities, it increases poverty in communities and countries around the world, and it is also negatively impacted by significant events like the COVID-19 crisis, and not just in terms of those who directly get ill as a result of the virus, but the consequences of a lockdown on developing nations, access to food, water, healthcare, everything else that needs dealing with. All of those underlying issues have not gone away. What I've done for each of the SDGs I'm going to talk about is just pull out, a relevant newspaper article. I want to demonstrate that all of these, although it's not obvious at the off that, we're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, the themes that the SDGs are addressing is, front and center of the newspaper news on a daily basis. So this was one I grabbed the other day, Sunday the 10th of May, and this was a YouPoll Gov that found that 8 out of 10 people would prefer the government to prioritize health and well-being over economic growth during the coronavirus crisis. Okay, so that's really interesting because that means that society has higher expectations of health and well-being. What we do see, though, in terms of that triple bottom line, that where the economy is not so strong, that actually has negative impacts on health and well-being. So how do we bring those two into line? The biggest takeaway here is that the focus on GDP means that economic growth takes place at the expense of the environment and people's quality of life. So we need to bring people and planet back to the forefront of how we move forward. The key business themes that SDG 3 addresses, within each of the 17 goals, there are sub-goals, 167 in total. For this specific one, SDG 3, there are 13 targets that underpin this overarching goal. Out of those 13, it's my opinion that about 5 are actionable for businesses in the context of how they make their investment decisions. So everything surrounding occupational health and safety, mental health and well-being, access to medication and vaccines, which is highly pertinent right now, access to essential healthcare services, and air and quality water. So I would highly recommend, I'll give some resources at the end of this webinar, but do a little bit of extra reading around each of the SDGs, read the sub-goals, and you'll begin to see that actually you're probably doing a lot of stuff in your business already that is supporting the SDGs. What you can do is then use the recommended KPIs, data, and monitoring mechanisms to make sure that the action you take is bringing about real results, quantifiable results. And there are some really easy solutions. Again, you'll probably find that you're possibly doing some of these in some way, shape, or form. Number one, align your human resource policies with the principles of human rights. Partner with NGOs, public clinics to raise awareness and access to healthcare services within your organizations. I know that, making investments in health need to be a priority going forward here. It's in the news every day, with the government now actively encouraging people to go back to work. What is the role of health and safety in terms of how businesses return to work, and how much investment and work needs to be done to make sure that it's safe for them to return to work? Businesses also have the opportunity to leverage their corporate resources to support healthcare delivery, which again, we have seen in leaps and bounds in terms of how businesses have innovated their activities to address the COVID-19 crisis. So we're proving that we can do it. Whatever the issue is, we can react to it pretty quickly. We just need to bring sustainability to the forefront of the conversation and find solutions for those. Now we can have a look at SDG 4. So what we've done is, off of that first table, these are the common ones that most businesses can affect in some way, shape, or form. There are others, there are 17 others, and they really are worth delving into, because the industry, the sector, the country that you live in, the area that you operate in, can all affect which ones are most relevant to your activities. Now, education is huge. Education for sustainability is huge. Knowledge and understanding of the issues that need to be addressed is paramount to bring about real change. And quality in education has been significantly affected by the COVID-19 crisis. So currently, the estimate is that the COVID-19 outbreak has disrupted the education of at least 290 million students worldwide. That is terrifying. That is students who have access to first-class education, but also students who depend on education for their, free school meals, for access to books, for getting out of the house, for that social element, all of the other social, economic, and environmental benefits that education brings have all basically been shut down as a consequence of this. The themes within the SDG, so there are 10 targets under quality education. I, again, believe that 4 of them are most actionable for businesses in terms of their investment decisions. A recent Morgan Stanley report said that a combination of technology and education-focused companies are helping to who are helping to expand access to education, can certainly make a significant improvement with relevant investments. So considering, and again, this is all business resilience, for yourselves, availability of a skilled workforce, that education for sustainable development, capacity building, and job creation. And these are some of the options, that businesses can explore. So aligning your business with higher education institutions to make sure that the curriculum is fit for business purposes, providing internships and work study programs, giving your employees continuous opportunities for development. And one that I think is quite interesting, and we'll take a minute here just to get some feedback, about developing cost-effective education products and services that eliminate barriers to access and improve the quality of learning. And again, the COVID-19 crisis has really brought this one to the forefront. So we wonder, from the group that's there, has anybody got any kind of innovative induction programs, training programs, ways to educate your staff while they're working remotely, ways to engage them, ways to share information and highlight awareness? We'd be really interested to see, kind of how people are addressing this as a direct result of the COVID crisis.
Okay, thanks for that, Tana. While people are doing that, just a little bit of housekeeping, if I can. It looks as though there's at least 20 people who were very frustrated, can't get onto the webinar this morning. So they've sent me emails. So well done to all those who've actually managed to get on. But if I can make a polite request that if you know the people who have been trying to get onto the call, can you just remind them that this will be uploaded onto the iirsm website, Northeastern Cumbria, LinkedIn site. So if you can remind them, that would be much appreciated. Also, in terms of who's on the webinar at the moment, can I just run a couple of quick checks just to make sure? First of all, Doug Wood. Doug, I'm going to unmute your mic. Can you just confirm that your sound's okay now, please? Doug, are you there? Hello, Doug. Okay, I'll try that later. What about Malik Salab? Malik, can you please confirm that you're okay? You can hear everything? Malik?
Glenn, it's Asger. Just to let you know that both Doug and Malik can hear. They've just responded through the chat.
Ah, right. Okay, that's great. I was trying to unmute them just so they could speak, but if they've done it that way, I was just concerned that there seems to be a bit of a problem with people getting onto the link this morning. But well done again to those who've managed. So yeah, okay. Thanks, Doug, and thanks, Malik, just for that confirmation. We were getting a bit concerned. So hopefully this has given you a couple of minutes to answer Tamar's question. And when she's ready, I'll hand you back across to Tamar again.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, so the next SDG that I'd like to have a look at is affordable and clean energy. And again, from kind of an environmental perspective, this is something that is really, really important. Reliable, affordable electricity is needed to keep people connected at home, to run life-saving equipment in hospitals. And the pandemic is putting pressure on every part of a country's economy and society because of how much we've had to change our infrastructure to accommodate this new way of living. The reality is that 840 million people worldwide, but predominantly in sub-Saharan Africa, live without access to electricity. And hundreds of millions only have very limited or unreliable electricity. So for doctors and first responders to treat infected populations is based on the assumption that clinics, medical equipment, facilities are fully functioning with access to sufficient, uninterrupted, reliable electricity. And truth is 28% of healthcare facilities in developing countries are able to deliver on that. There's also, again, lining up with the requirement on the UK to prioritize a green recovery. What we found is that our reliance on fossil fuels has left countries more exposed to the economic shock of this global crisis. And governments should look to renewable energy to help reduce such risks. The confirmation of COVID-19, along with the announcement by Saudi Arabia that it would increase oil supply, caused a massive impact on global markets. Now, economists, scientists, and various other very, very smart people are saying that if we were dependent on renewable energy, we wouldn't get the shocks to our economy as a result of these types of crises. So there is a strong driver now to move away from fossil fuels and rebuild our economy based on renewable resources. There are 5 targets under SDG 7, most of which can be impacted by businesses around areas like electricity access, availability and reliability, moving to renewable energy and being efficient with the energy that we use, and also investing in infrastructure and the environment. Some of the things that businesses can do to bring about pretty immediate positive benefits is to divest from fossil fuels, and that includes investments in pensions within your own organization, to commit to sourcing 100% of your operational electricity from renewable sources. There is a whole market of renewable energy available. Most of the time it's cheaper than fossil fuels, and it is far, far better for the environment. There are also ways to reduce the internal demand. And it's funny that, we've been saying this for a number of years. We should travel less, we should walk, cycle, as little as possible. We should as much as possible, we should stay locally wherever we can. And instead of doing needless journeys, we should move to remote platforms like Zoom to conduct our meetings. And if COVID's taught us anything, is that actually we can adopt pretty quickly to less energy intensive modes of conducting business. And again, one that's personally very important to me in terms of how I support businesses, it is to use carbon calculations and science-based targets to reduce your overall demand for energy and to calculate your environmental improvement. SDG 8 is also highly relevant at the moment. This one was a bit tougher when I was pulling out, sample newspapers. It is everywhere. The big question is, how on earth are we going to come out of this crisis and recover our economy? And this goal is looking to us to make sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth and provide a full and productive employment and decent work for all. It's everywhere in the news. What we know is that we must prioritize a green economy, that we are likely facing a recession as we come out of this, and that people's jobs are going to be seriously impacted if businesses are not able to get back up and running after this as quickly as possible. The International Labour Organization is predicting that 25 million people could lose their jobs due to the corona-induced economic and labour crisis. So again, we have an opportunity to find new markets, sustainable markets, to move forward and provide those jobs. And as we saw earlier in my presentation, there are a lot of opportunities and a lot of potential jobs that could be made in more sustainable environments. Key themes around SDG 8 include employment and job creation, economic inclusion, non-discrimination, the availability of a skilled workforce, capacity building within that workforce, and the elimination of forced or compulsory labor, okay? And some of the things that businesses can do, and again, I would wager that most of you are probably doing this already in some way, shape, or form, is to offer apprentice opportunities, to foster an entrepreneurial culture within your organization, to initiate skills development programs, not only within your business, but also down the supply chain, and make sure that your supply chain is also sustainable and ethical and aligned to your core values. And make sure that you have mechanisms to identify anything that is untoward so that you can act on that pretty quickly. Again, another really relevant SDG as we consider the post-COVID recovery. How do we build resilient infrastructure and promote inclusive industrialization and innovation going forward? So again, this is all over the news. And in fact, this is quite an inspiring one if you wanted to do a little bit of research. The examples of innovation from businesses are daily occurrences. I mean, people have just come out and done incredible things to help us address this challenge. I nicked this quote directly out of this article, but what the journalist says is that pandemics catalyze innovation and accelerate change by providing an environment for launching and testing new ideas. Business norms are shaking to the core of what we've taken for granted for decades and centuries. And there is a wave of innovation designed for our new way of living and work that will spawn, so much long-term societal change. So again, within all of this darkness and this terrible situation that we're in, there is opportunity. Businesses and individuals and societies and governments need to recognize these opportunities and make sure that they sit at the heart of how we move forward out of this. The key themes within SDG 9 are things around infrastructure, access to financial services, again, investment in the environment, research and development, and addressing technological legacies. So some of the things that you can do is invest in new resilient infrastructure or retrofit existing infrastructure to make it more sustainable. Promote innovation by giving your stakeholders the opportunity to give you solutions to the issues that are most relevant to them. To establish standards and regulations that ensure company projects and initiatives are managed sustainably, and to foster product and technology innovation to address the key environmental issues like resource efficiency and impact on our environment and ecosystem. And then the last ones that I just want to kind of talk about are the SDGs around environmental sustainability. These are the ones that, again, personally are most relevant to me, and these are the ones that I work with businesses to really address in terms of environmental improvement aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. So actually under the banner of environmental sustainability, there are 5 SDGs that are relevant to businesses and to achieving this objective, and numerous sub-goals under each of these that businesses can tap into. But what I find is that if you took any one of these as a headline, any action that you take underneath it is likely to have a positive effect for the other SDGs. And hopefully, as I've been going through this, you can begin to see that, none of the SDGs stand in isolation. They don't sit on their own. If you do something under one of the SDGs, you are likely to have positive effects on various other ones. So it's about mapping that and understanding what you're really trying to solve. This is quite interesting. So sustainability in the news, I mean, I could have had a million articles here. There's a lot of positive news for the environment that's come off the back of lockdown scenarios. But this is quite interesting. So Amsterdam are looking at how they're going to mend their economy after COVID-19. And what they've said they're going to do is adopt something called the donut model, because they've concluded that the global attachment to economic growth and the laws of supply and demand are no longer good enough. We need to consider people, planet, and profit. So if you fancy a bit of extra reading, I would highly, highly recommend Donut Economics by Kate Raworth. This is the theory that Amsterdam is going to write into its policy for economic recovery. And it's all about putting people, planet, profit at the center of how to manage development, sustainable development. It's quite a complicated graph, but essentially it's not too different to recognizing the importance of our ecosystem services, those fundamental, basic, natural processes that make human life both possible to live and worthy of living, to really give focus to that triple bottom line of sustainability, people, planet, and profit, and also to recognize how Maslow's hierarchy of needs fits into economic growth, that we have to give those basic physiological and safety needs first before we can develop a strong society and economy off the back of this crisis. So there are a lot of themes that overlap within all of these. Under sustainable cities, we need to think about transport, access to public spaces, how people are going to use buildings after this COVID-19 crisis, things around sustainable resource consumption, materials recycling, procurement practices, climate action, energy efficiency, investment in the environment, protecting life below water, protecting life on land, and making sure that businesses operate ethically and sustainably. So what can you do to address environmental issues? Well, you can measure, manage, and mitigate your impacts on ecosystems and natural resources. You can commit to responsible sourcing practices beyond compliance. Most relevant, and again, there's a lot of literature out there at the moment supporting this, really looking at using a value chain and life cycle approach to developing new products and services to increase their life cycle and recyclability and be more efficient with the resources that you are used. To replace, limit, or prohibit the use of certain chemicals, so anything that is harmful to human health or the environment or that could cause pollution can be eliminated from products and give us clean products to use and bring into our homes. And the big one, taking us all the way back to the higher overarching issue of climate change, we need to take steps to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions through resource efficiency projects. And those resource efficiency projects, you know, there are so many points of intervention within businesses that can have a significant effect on greenhouse gas reduction. And this is generally the type of work that I would do with my clients, just really delve into all of this. So we are close to wrapping up now. The original question, can we tackle both climate change and the COVID-19 recovery? As I said earlier, absolutely, yes, we can. We are making choices now to shape the economy for decades to come. And the honest truth is, can we afford not to address climate change in this recovery process? Some of the things that I think we've learned as a result of COVID-19, one thing that I've been saying for years about climate change is that climate change has no borders. You know, it doesn't care about politics or societies or people. It is a global issue and will affect all of us. And the same is true for COVID-19. Absolutely nowhere geographically is immune from the impact of this. Global challenges require systemic change. Governments need to make decisions, but individual action makes a huge difference to the outcome. Simply by all of us staying at home, the consequence to air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, nature, biodiversity, it took a matter of weeks for it to recover and move in. People moved out, nature moved in. But what it looks like on a scale of everybody doing the same things is incredible. We know that prevention is better than cure. We know that climate change is not going away and all of these issues need to be addressed, and we are at the point, we are just about to hit the peak of where this becomes most significant. And all of our response measures need to be based on science. Now, I'm a scientist by nature. I cannot emphasize this strongly enough. Every action has a consequence, okay? We need to understand what the consequences of our actions are going to be, whether they are positive or negative, as opposed to making knee-jerk decisions based on speculation and rumor, okay? So we have to follow the science. And most notably is that this has highlighted to us that it is no longer business as usual. The whole concept of business as usual, I think, is dead and gone. You know, this is a new world, a post-COVID-19 world. So we really have an opportunity to move forward and do something different. Now, I know that that was a lot of content. Thank you for sticking with me. We're just over an hour, so I really do appreciate that. There is a lot in here. So like I say, if you have any questions afterwards, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But I'd also recommend that you can pop onto any of these websites or just a simple Google search around the Sustainable Development Goals, and you'll be able to really explore each of the 17 goals, all of the sub-goals. There's information out there about how to measure, monitor, what KPIs, and to just have a bit of a think about how you could possibly integrate some of these into your business strategy when you consider your post-COVID-19 recovery. I really hope that that's been interesting and helpful for you. Thank you so much for your time and attention. If anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Okay, Tamar, fantastic, absolutely outstanding. I know it's horrible when you're delivering a presentation like this and you can't see or feel or hear any feedback. So I hope you can hear this.
I can. Thank you, Glenn.
Take a breath, take a breath.
Yes, breathe.
That was absolutely outstanding. It really was. Thank you so much. I mean, you know, probably a 5-day training course there, being condensed into an hour. So yeah, a lot to take in, but again, absolutely outstanding. There's a number of people who've emailed me directly asking for Tamar's details. So there you go. They're on there.
Thank you very much.
They're on the slide. So so I probably, if I can follow up on your email, I will. But while you're on the call, there's Tamar's details there and her company. The video, the webinar presentation will be available in the next 24, 48 hours, as I've already said. I am very conscious of time, but I'm going to try and squeeze in, because people are still staying on the line, a couple of questions. Are you okay to take a couple of questions, Tamar?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so there's a couple of general comments. You can review them at your leisure. Questions specifically, I'd like to have a look at this one here. So do you think that the perception of risk and impact of climate change has or stroke will change as a result of COVID-19? For example, like climate change, a pandemic was predicted but not acted upon. And given the similarity of intervention outcomes, reduced travel, reduced air pollution, etc., do you think they could be linked together, Tamar?
I think that there is a huge responsibility to link them together. I think the problem around sustainability is education. Okay, so a lot of people are familiar with the concepts, but things like that triple bottom line of sustainability or the Sustainable Development Goals are not particularly well communicated. What I do think, though, is that the world as we know it is going to be quite different for the foreseeable future until a solution to COVID-19 has come. So the positive impacts that we're seeing on climate change now are probably going to last a little bit better. But I think people, you know, individuals within society, individuals within businesses, those that are sitting at home and are understanding that they can see more wildlife in their garden, that they can hear the birds and the bees because there isn't this constant buzz of traffic. And I think a lot of you know, mindfulness around being grateful and trying to deal with this crisis is making us recognize that nature is fundamental to our own health and well-being and how we personally handle this crisis.
Totally.
And I think it's the science, you know, it's the case of we didn't understand the impact that we were having on the environment. The science took a number of years to catch up with us. But what we've seen is that by not doing anything, nature doesn't take very long to recover. So I think it's going to be much more tangible for people. They'll understand, they'll be able to see it fairly quickly.
I really excellent. Excellent answer. I mean, we've had some feedback from Jenny Hughes-Death. To you, Tamar, directly. Go girl, well done. That's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed for that, Jenny. Another question I saw earlier on. I think this is a good one for anybody who's looking for, again, this is kind of putting you on the spot a little bit, but you know, it's just a general question. What tools can we use to assess and reduce risk, do you think? You know, what are the best ways to get the rest of the business on board if you're just starting out on your sustainability journey? You know, what are the sort of quick wins, Tamar, do you think?
Do you know what? What I do with most of the businesses that I work in is tap into those ISO standards. So if you operate or you are thinking about operating ISO 14001 for environmental management, 9001 for quality, or 45001 for health and safety, by using those international standards that businesses are so familiar with, we all know about them, we all know they're a necessity for businesses. What those standards ask us to do is consider risk and opportunity, and to identify how we're going to monitor and measure risk and opportunity to bring about organizational performance. So using frameworks that we are familiar with, that probably exist in most of our businesses, when it comes to looking at risk or opportunity, track it against the SDGs. There's your pestle analysis, there's your context in terms of understanding key issues, and actually integrate it. And it doesn't matter which standard, quality, health, safety, environment, it's people, planet, profit. That's your triple bottom line. So there are opportunities within all of those standards that we're familiar with to begin, they provide a framework for beginning to integrate these.
And I think what we discussed earlier, and you made the point during your presentation, I think a lot of it is centered around proportionality as well, isn't it? We spoke earlier on relating to how, there's been a mass reduction in the manufacture of plastic because of the negative publicity it's had. Whereas an interesting article this morning was talking about the lack of plastic to make protective PPE visors now. And there's a 2-month sort of wait. And what the government is saying, it's all about education and people understanding things like the sustainable development goals and environmental impact assessments, rather than knee-jerking. Would you agree with that, Tamar?
Yeah, 100%, 100% would agree with that. In fact, I've written a couple of blogs around this, that the plastic is not the evil. In fact, plastic has done wonders in terms of healthcare, and how it supports that, in terms of preventing food waste, in terms of improving the quality of things that we buy, products and services and materials that we buy. It has a place. It has a really important place. It's all the excess, it's that irresponsible take, make, use, throw. So things like straws and cotton buds and all of, plastic bags. None of these are essential. We've just got we've done too much, and then we've not managed how we control that at the end of life. So it's understanding where, materials like plastics serve the most value, and controlling them in that environment and getting rid of the excess. But that is knowledge and awareness. Unfortunately, 21st century, we are all about convenience, and we need to change that mindset.
No, that's fantastic, Tamar. Well, look, I mean, I'm conscious of the time, so any of the questions that people have posed to Tamar, there will be a printout of them, and I'm sure if she's got time and she can, Tamar will come back to people with any specifics, but it's probably best if I can suggest you contact Tamar at Imvelo directly. So once again, a massive thank you for that today, Tamar. It's really appreciated, as is your time. So thank you for that.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful, thank you. And again, just as a reminder to everybody, we have another webinar next week, and that's going to be brought to us by John Devitt. John is the CEO of another Northeastern Cumbria-based business called Recovery for Life. And John's session is going to be all centered around managing health and well-being during the return to work phase post-COVID-19. So that's going to be next Thursday at the same time, 10 o'clock. Please watch out for the invites and share where you can. And all that remains, again, is to thank everybody for coming onto the call today and being patient with us. A huge thank you to Tamar for presenting today and giving us her time. And thanks to the rest of the regional strategy group for helping us put this together. So stay safe, everyone, and stay well, and look forward to seeing you all, albeit virtually, again next week. Many thanks. Bye for now.
Thank you.